A finished backyard pool at sunset, glowing blue under string lights. Families and neighbors relax, laughing and barbecuing. Children splash in the water. In the background, the clipboard lies abandoned on the ground, symbolizing the Hoa president's downfall. Warm, triumphant atmosphere. The pool that started it all in the quiet, cookie-cutter suburb of Brookside Meadows. Conformity was more than a suggestion, it was a rule etched into every manicured lawn and beige-colored facade. The houses were nearly identical, the hedges trimmed to precise lengths, and the mailboxes polished as though competing in some silent contest. To live there meant to live under the invisible thumb of the Homeowners Association, an entity as feared as it was despised, led by one woman whose name carried an unspoken weight, Karen. Karen was not simply a neighbor or a resident. She was the president of the Hoa, the self-appointed guardian of perfection. Her word was law, and her gaze seemed to linger on every property like a hawk circling prey. Any violation, no matter how small, was met with fines, threats, and letters typed in bold. Capital letters, overgrown grass, mismatched paint shades, garden decorations not approved by the association. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. But beneath this suburban fortress of sameness, one house stood with a secret desire. The homeowner, quiet and unassuming, had long dreamed of installing something that was not only rare in Brookside Meadows, but practically forbidden: a backyard pool. It wasn't just about luxury. It was about freedom. It was about carving out a space of peace and joy away from the suffocating grip of Karen and her clipboard. And after months of careful planning, quiet savings, and endless research, the dream was finally becoming reality. Contractors had been scheduled, the permits filed with the city, and within days, the digging would begin. At first, there was excitement, pure, unfiltered anticipation. The thought of diving into cool blue water on hot summer afternoons, of inviting family over for barbecues by the poolside, of finally having something in the backyard that made the house feel like a home, rather than just another Hoa-regulated box, was intoxicating. But with that excitement came an unshakable dread, because in Brookside Meadows, nothing escaped Karen. And sure enough, the very day the contractors arrived with their equipment, the neighborhood watchful eyes awoke. Curtains twitched, lawn chairs shifted, cars slowed down to catch a glimpse. And then, like clockwork, Karen herself appeared. She marched down the sidewalk with her usual air of authority, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the backyard like a general surveying enemy territory. She asked no questions, knocked on no doors. She simply observed, scribbled something down, and walked away with the stiff posture of someone already plotting. The homeowner knew then that the battle had begun. By evening, the first letter had arrived, an official notice from the Hoa citing unauthorized construction activity. The pool, it declared, was in violation of community standards and would need to be halted immediately. The words carried the familiar sting of Karen's overreach, cloaked in the veneer of formality. But here's where things were different. Unlike so many neighbors who had caved to Karen's demands, this homeowner had done their homework. The pool had city approval, every permit properly filed, and nothing in the HOA bylaws explicitly forbade it. Karen's authority, as suffocating as it often felt, had its limits. That realization sparked something powerful: defiance. The letter was crumpled, tossed aside, and the construction continued. Each day, the sound of machinery filled the air, much to the delight of the homeowner and the growing frustration of Karen. But Karen was not one to give up so easily. The following days saw a barrage of tactics: daily inspections from the Hoa, neighbors mysteriously concerned about noise and safety, rumors spreading like wildfire about how the pool would lower property values or attract undesirable gatherings. It was clear Karen was rallying her forces, trying to suffocate the project before it could be completed. Yet the hole in the ground grew deeper. The foundation was laid. The shape of the dream was becoming real, and every step closer to completion felt like a small victory in a much larger war. Then, the boldest move came. One afternoon, as workers lined the pool with concrete, Karen herself appeared in the backyard uninvited. Clipboard clutched tightly, she announced her presence not with words, but with the sheer audacity of walking onto private property as if she owned it. She surveyed the pool, measured distances, and scribbled furiously. When she finally left, Her expression was carved in stone, grim, determined, and dangerous. That night, another letter arrived. But this time, it wasn't just a notice of violation. It was a demand. The HOA, under Karen's signature, insisted that the pool be halted, dismantled, and the yard restored to its original condition. The letter closed with a chilling line. Failure to comply could result in legal action, fines, and even a lien placed against the home. For most people, this would have been the end. The weight of an HOA lawsuit, the fear of losing a home, would have been enough to force compliance. And Karen knew that. She thrived on it. She expected obedience, but she hadn't expected what came next. The homeowner didn't back down. Instead, they sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the demand letter, and smiled. Because while Karen believed she held all the power, she had underestimated the one thing that would turn the tide: preparation. The homeowner already had a plan Karen would never see coming. A plan that would not only protect the pool, but expose Karen's overreach to the entire community. And so, as the construction carried on and the water began to fill the basin, the stage was quietly being set for a showdown. Karen thought she was tightening the noose, but in reality, she was walking straight into a trap of her own making. The pool wasn't just a backyard addition anymore. It had become a symbol, a line in the sand, a declaration that enough was enough. And by the time the water sparkled under the summer sun, Karen's reign of fear and fines would begin to crack. The war for Brookside Meadows had begun, and it all started with a pool. Karen's escalation following week in Brookside Meadows unfolded like a storm cloud, gathering over the horizon. The pool was nearly finished, the concrete set, the shimmering tiles catching glints of sunlight that promised relaxation and freedom. Yet the atmosphere in the neighborhood was anything but peaceful. Karen's anger had become the neighborhood's daily entertainment, her constant pacing and whispered complaints turning every cul-de-sac into a stage for her drama. Karen thrived on control. For years, her rule had gone unchallenged. Every flower bed approved by her committee, every paint color scrutinized under her critical eye, every minor infraction met with a fine that seemed less like punishment and more like a declaration of dominance. But now, with one pool, all of that power felt as if it were slipping from her grasp. She could not tolerate the idea that someone had dared defy her openly, boldly, and without fear. She doubled down. Letters escalated from strongly worded notices to legal threats. HOA meetings, once sparsely attended, suddenly brimmed with neighbors who had been encouraged to attend. Karen took her seat at the head of the long conference table, wielding her clipboard like a judge's gavel, warning everyone of the supposed dangers of the pool. She spoke of liability, of increased insurance costs, of how property values would plummet if such lawlessness was allowed to stand. But beneath the surface of her tirades, there was something else: envy. Karen had always prided herself on being the queen of the neighborhood, her home the most immaculate, her landscaping the most precise. Yet now, a single house with a pool threatened to overshadow her carefully curated kingdom. It wasn't just about the HOA bylaws anymore. It was personal. Meanwhile, the homeowner's plan was unfolding quietly, methodically. They knew Karen would not stop. They knew the pool alone wasn't enough to win. So instead of reacting to her fury, they began documenting everything. Every letter, every trespass, every public outburst was recorded, cataloged, and stored away like ammunition for a battle yet to come. And Karen provided plenty of material. One evening, under the cover of twilight, she returned to the property. This time she carried not just her clipboard, but a measuring tape, a camera, and a sense of entitlement so strong it was almost laughable. She strode into the yard again uninvited, snapping photos of the pool, measuring distances, muttering to herself as though building a case only she could understand. The homeowner watched silently from the window, phone in hand, recording every second. The next day, the HOA distributed flyers throughout the neighborhood. Bold letters across the top read, "Community at risk." Karen's message was clear: the pool was a threat, and the homeowner was the villain. She urged neighbors to sign a petition demanding its removal, promising that if they stood together, the HOA could force compliance. But here's where Karen miscalculated. Many neighbors, though weary of her authoritarian style, had always gone along simply to avoid trouble. Yet seeing her obsession with the pool revealed cracks in her authority. To some, it looked less like leadership and more like desperation. Whispers began to spread. Some neighbors quietly admired the homeowner's courage. Others simply enjoyed watching Karen lose her grip. The petition that was supposed to unite the community instead highlighted its divisions still. Karen pressed harder. She scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting, sending out notices stamped in red ink as though summoning residents to a courtroom. On the appointed evening, the clubhouse filled with anxious chatter. Karen sat at the head of the table, eyes blazing, and launched into a speech that lasted nearly an hour. She railed against the dangers of pools, the irresponsibility of rogue homeowners, and the slippery slope of noncompliance. She painted a grim picture of chaos and decline, of Brookside Meadows becoming a lawless wasteland if her authority wasn't upheld. But then, the homeowner revealed the first part of their plan. Quietly, calmly, they produced the permits, official, stamped documents from the city, proving beyond doubt that every step of the construction had been legal. The room fell silent. Karen's face drained of color as neighbors passed the papers around, realizing the truth. The pool was not only allowed, it was protected by law. Karen tried to recover, insisting that the HOAS rules superseded city permits. But the damage had been done. The neighbors had seen her bluff exposed. The more she argued, the more unhinged she appeared. The meeting, meant to be her moment of triumph, ended in awkward silence and side glances. People began to leave, unimpressed, unconvinced, and quietly questioning whether Karen's reign was as absolute as she wanted them to believe. But Karen was not finished. If anything, the failed meeting fueled her rage. The very next morning, she contacted the HOAS attorney, insisting on drafting legal action. Letters were sent threatening thousands of dollars in fines, the placement of a lien, and even the possibility of foreclosure. To her, this wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about crushing defiance before it spread. And yet, behind her fury, Karen didn't realize she was falling directly into the homeowner's trap. Every threat, every letter, every desperate move only added more evidence to the growing file of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. The homeowner's plan was never just to build a pool. It was to expose Karen for what she was, a tyrant hiding behind the HOAS name. By the time the pool water sparkled under the afternoon sun, the trap was nearly complete. And as neighbors began to murmur about lawsuits and overreach, Karen found herself in a position she had never known before losing control. The pool was finished. The dream was real. But the war was only just beginning. And in her blind fury, Karen was about to push things further than anyone thought possible. The homeowner was ready. Karen was not the breaking point by midsummer. The pool had become more than just a backyard feature. It was a shimmering oasis, a symbol of defiance that drew quiet admiration from some neighbors and seething hatred from one woman in particular. Karen could hardly stand to look at it. Every time she walked past, her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and her grip on her clipboard left faint indents on the paper. From her perspective, the pool wasn't just a violation, it was an insult. It was a direct challenge to the authority she had cultivated for years, an authority that rested not on kindness or respect, but on fear. And fear only worked if people believed she could crush them. The longer that pool sparkled in the sun, the weaker her grip became. Karen's frustration spilled over into obsession. She began spending more time patrolling the neighborhood than at her own home, lingering near the pool like a shadow. She timed the construction trucks, documented the sound of splashing water, even photographed family members enjoying the backyard, as though each image were evidence of a crime. Neighbors whispered about her behavior, some calling it dedication, others calling it madness. Her next move was bold, almost reckless. She filed a lawsuit in the name of the HOA, demanding the pool's removal. Thick envelopes stamped with official seals landed in the homeowner's mailbox. Pages filled with legal jargon meant to intimidate. To most residents, such an action would have been devastating. Legal fees, court appearances, and the looming possibility of losing one's home could crush even the strongest spirit. Karen believed this was the knockout punch, but the homeowner was prepared. The plan that had been quietly set in motion weeks earlier was ready to unfold. With every letter Karen sent, with every overstep of her authority. The evidence of harassment grew stronger. The lawsuit was not an ending, it was an opening. The homeowner contacted their attorney, handed over the meticulously organized file of Karen's actions, and prepared to counterattack. While legal wheels began to turn, Karen launched her most audacious tactic yet. She tried to seize control of the property itself. At the next home meeting, with her usual dramatics, she proposed a new amendment to the bylaws. It would give the whole the authority to assume ownership of any non-compliant structures or amenities, including pools, patios, and sheds. To Karen, this wasn't about bylaws. It was about claiming the pool for herself. If she couldn't remove it, she would control it. The room erupted into confusion and murmurs. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the absurdity of the proposal. Others, too fearful of Karen's wrath, hesitated to oppose her outright. She spoke with passion, painting the idea as a necessary safeguard for the community. But beneath the rhetoric, the truth was clear. Karen wanted that pool. She wanted to sit by it, to claim it as part of her kingdom, to rewrite history so that defiance never appeared to win. And for the first time, neighbors began to push back. Questions arose. Why did the Hoa need such power? Why was one backyard pool being treated like a threat to civilization? People who had once stayed silent now muttered openly about abuse of authority. The vote on Karen's amendment failed spectacularly, leaving her visibly shaken at the head of the table. That night, she stormed home, her empire cracking. But instead of retreating, she escalated again. She began sending private messages to neighbors, trying to turn them against the homeowner. She claimed the pool was unsafe for children, that it attracted pests, that the chemicals would poison the soil. The lies grew more elaborate, more desperate, until even her loyal supporters began to doubt her sanity. Meanwhile, the homeowner's backyard became a gathering place. Barbecues, small parties, quiet evenings by the water. Each event chipped away at Karen's narrative of danger and disorder. Neighbors who once feared her fines found themselves laughing by the pool, realizing that life outside Karen's control wasn't chaotic at all, it was freeing. Karen noticed, and it drove her to the brink. One late evening, under the cover of darkness, she made her boldest move yet. Slipping through the side gate, she entered the backyard, flashlight in hand. Her plan was simple: find something, anything that could justify shutting the pool down. A misplaced chemical bottle, a loose tile, an unapproved fence height. She prowled the yard like a thief, documenting everything with her camera. What she didn't realize was that the homeowner had anticipated this. Security cameras had been installed weeks earlier, every angle of the yard covered. As Karen crept around the pool, crouching by the water and muttering angrily, every second was recorded in crystal clarity. The next morning, the footage was sent to the attorney. Trespassing, harassment, abuse of power, it was the missing piece of the puzzle. Karen had not only crossed the line, she had obliterated it. But for now, the homeowner kept quiet. They let Karen continue her spiral, knowing that with each frantic move, she dug herself deeper into the hole. The pool had become more than a backyard luxury. It was bait, and Karen was caught. The lawsuit was still pending. The community was restless, and Karen, blinded by rage, was about to make the mistake that would cost her everything. The counterattack tension in Brookside Meadows was now impossible to ignore. What had started as a simple backyard project had transformed the neighborhood into a battleground. With Karen at the center of a storm she could no longer control, the pool gleamed like a jewel, and with every shimmer of water under the summer sun, it reminded everyone that Karen's grip was loosening. But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, the pool was still a challenge she could conquer, a stain she could erase from her kingdom. She doubled her efforts, firing off letters, pestering city inspectors, and bombarding the homeowner with threats. Each move was more frantic than the last, her tone swinging wildly between official authority and personal vendetta. What she didn't realize was that the homeowner's plan was no longer defensive, it was offensive. Quietly, steadily, the evidence gathered over the past weeks had been shaped into a weapon. Every trespass, every false accusation, every abuse of power was carefully documented, forming a picture of harassment so undeniable it could topple even the most entrenched Hoa president. The homeowner's attorney filed a countersuit, not just to defend against Karen's claims, but to expose her. Harassment, defamation, abuse of authority, trespassing, it was all laid out in black and white. The centerpiece of the case was the late-night footage, where Karen was caught sneaking into the yard, crouching by the pool like a thief in the night. When the judge saw that video, the homeowner knew Karen's empire would crumble. But the plan wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about the community. Karen had ruled through fear for so long that many neighbors couldn't imagine life without her shadow. To break her hold completely, the homeowner needed to pull back the curtain and show everyone who Karen truly was. The opportunity came at the next home meeting. The room was packed, curiosity buzzing through the air. People wanted answers. Karen, as usual, sat at the head of the table, clipboard ready. Her expression hardened into one of righteous fury. She began with her usual speech, denouncing the pool as a danger, the homeowner as reckless, the community as fragile without her watchful eye. Then the homeowner stood and played the footage. On the screen, in front of every resident, Karen appeared. The timestamp glowed in the corner as she slipped through the gate, flashlight in hand. The room fell silent as she prowled the yard, snapping photos, muttering angrily to herself. And then, there it was, her crouched by the pool, measuring tape dangling, trespassing in plain view. When the footage ended, the silence was deafening. For the first time, Karen's clipboard shook in her hands. Her mouth opened, but no excuses came out. Neighbors who had once feared her fines now stared in disbelief, their expressions a mix of shock, anger, and vindication. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into voices. People began to speak openly about the fines they'd paid, the harassment they'd endured, the constant fear of Karen's letters. The footage had shattered the illusion of authority, and the resentment that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her clipboard on the table and declaring the footage an invasion of her privacy. But the room no longer belonged to her. The board members, once her loyal allies, exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they hesitated. For the first time, they questioned her. The homeowner didn't need to say much more. The footage had done the work. The countersuit was already in motion, the legal tide turning rapidly. But the real victory was in that room, in the faces of the neighbors who realized they no longer needed to live under Karen's rule. In the days that followed, the shift was undeniable. The petition Karen had pushed vanished into irrelevance. Neighbors stopped answering her calls. Her late-night patrols, once tolerated, now drew curtains pulled shut and lights turned off. The very community she claimed to protect was abandoning her, one household at a time. But Karen, blinded by pride, refused to see the writing on the wall. Instead, she escalated further, lashing out in ways that only hurt her more. She filed complaints with city officials, only to be ignored. She threatened to resign from the HOA board if her demands weren't met, only for whispers to circulate that perhaps that was exactly what the community wanted. Behind the scenes, the homeowner's attorney tightened the case, preparing for the day in court. The evidence was overwhelming. The narrative clear: Karen had abused her position, harassed a neighbor, and crossed legal boundaries in her obsession to control a pool that was never hers to begin with. The pool itself had become more than just a backyard feature. It was a symbol of victory. Family gatherings continued, laughter echoed across the fence lines, and neighbors began to join in, enjoying a freedom they hadn't felt in years. The water sparkled in the sunlight, not just as a sign of defiance, but as a promise of change. Karen, meanwhile, grew more isolated. Her walks around the neighborhood became shorter, her rants quieter. But inside, her anger burned hotter than ever. She believed the lawsuit would still save her, that somehow the courtroom would restore her power. She didn't realize that the very system she thought she controlled was about to turn against her. The homeowner's plan had worked perfectly. Karen had walked straight into the trap. The only thing left was to watch her downfall unfold. And that moment was coming soon. The courtroom showdown day of the hearing arrived like the climax of a storm that had been brewing for months. In the courthouse downtown, far removed from the pristine lawns and manicured hedges of Brookside Meadows, the battle that had consumed the neighborhood was about to reach its peak. The pool, once just a backyard dream, had now become the centerpiece of a legal war that would decide the future of both a homeowner and the woman who had ruled over them for years. Karen arrived first. She marched into the courthouse with her usual stiffness, clutching a thick stack of binders and notes, each one labeled with color-coded tabs. She wore the expression of someone convinced of victory, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flashing with the certainty that the law would finally bend to her will. For years, her threats and letters had been enough to intimidate her neighbors. Why should this be any different? The homeowner entered quietly, without theatrics, accompanied by their attorney. They carried no towering stack of papers, no props of intimidation. What they had was far more powerful, a meticulously prepared case, evidence gathered with patience, and the truth on their side. The courtroom filled with the low murmur of attendees' neighbors who had taken the day off work just to witness the spectacle. Whispers spread along the benches. Some were there out of curiosity, others out of resentment toward Karen, and a few simply to see how the mighty would fall when the judge entered and the case began. Karen launched into her argument with the ferocity of someone who believed she was untouchable. She spoke of community standards, of bylaws, of the dangers of non-compliance. Her voice rose and fell with practiced authority, each statement punctuated by the thud of her hand on the binder before her. She presented the pool as a menace, a reckless indulgence that threatened the order she had worked so hard to preserve. But as her words spilled out, something became clear. Beneath the surface of her arguments lay obsession. She wasn't just fighting for community rules. She was fighting for control, for ego, for pride. And the more she spoke, the more the courtroom could sense it. Then it was the homeowner's turn. Calmly, their attorney presented the city permits, stamped and signed, proving the legality of every step taken. The documents were undeniable, each one a dagger that cut through Karen's arguments. The judge nodded, the weight of the law tipping away from Karen. Next came the letters, stacks of them, each bearing Karen's name, each filled with escalating threats. The attorney read portions aloud, the courtroom listening as her tone shifted from formality to personal vendetta. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't about protecting the neighborhood. It was about targeting one homeowner with relentless harassment. But the final blow was the footage. On the screen, the late-night trespass played for all to see. Karen, creeping into the backyard with flashlight in hand, measuring tape dangling, her face twisted in determination. The silence in the courtroom was heavy as the video unfolded, each second driving the nail deeper into her case. When it ended, the room erupted in murmurs. The judge leaned forward, brows furrowed, and asked Karen to explain herself. But for once, Karen had no words. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again. But no excuse could undo what everyone had just witnessed. The ruling was swift. The lawsuit Karen had filed was dismissed entirely. The pool was declared fully legal, protected by permits and beyond the reach of the HOA. But the judgment didn't stop there. The countersuit was upheld. The court found Karen guilty of harassment, trespassing, and abuse of her position. She was ordered to pay damages, legal fees, and was barred from setting foot on the homeowner's property again. The shockwave through Brookside Meadows was immediate. The woman who had once ruled with fear had been stripped of her authority in front of everyone. The gavel had not just dismissed her case, it had shattered her reputation. Neighbors whispered as they left the courtroom. Some smiled quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief. But all of them knew that the era of Karen's dominance was over. The homeowner, once seen as just another quiet resident, had done what no one else had dared to try. They had stood up to Karen and won. But for Karen, the humiliation was unbearable. Her face, red with anger and shame, remained frozen as she gathered her binders and stormed out of the courtroom. For years, she had been untouchable, the self-appointed queen of Brookside Meadows. Now, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale, her empire in ruins. Back in the neighborhood, the ripples of the courtroom defeat spread quickly. At the next HOA meeting, attendance swelled not to support Karen, but to demand change. Board members who had once nodded along to her every word now distanced themselves. Petitions began to circulate, this time not against the pool, but against Karen herself. The residents wanted her removed from her position, stripped of the power she had abused for so long. The homeowner watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The plan had worked, every step leading to this moment. The pool sparkled in the backyard, a constant reminder of victory. But it was no longer just about water and tiles, it was about freedom, about proving that even the most overbearing tyrant could be defeated. Karen's downfall was nearly complete. All that remained was for the community itself to deliver the final blow. The fall of the Queen in the weeks that followed the courtroom defeat. Brookside Meadows felt like a different neighborhood. The air was lighter, the streets quieter. The constant tension that had once lingered like a storm cloud finally beginning to dissipate. For the first time in years, residents stepped out of their homes without the fear of receiving one of Karen's infamous letters. The spell she had cast over the community was broken, but Karen herself had not accepted it. She retreated into her home, blinds drawn, rarely seen except for the occasional hurried trip to her mailbox. The woman who had once strutted down the sidewalks with clipboard in hand, inspecting every lawn and driveway, now moved like a ghost, avoiding the stares of neighbors who no longer respected her. Her pride had been wounded, her reputation destroyed, but her stubbornness refused to let her admit defeat. Still, the damage was irreversible. The countersuit had not only drained her finances with damages and legal fees, it had also stripped her of credibility. Her trespassing, once whispered rumors, was now public record. Parents pointed her out to their children as a cautionary tale, and neighbors who had once bowed to her authority now openly laughed. When her name came up in conversation, the final act came at the next HOA meeting. Word spread quickly, and nearly every household sent a representative. The clubhouse buzzed with anticipation, the crowd larger than anyone could remember. At the front of the room, Karen sat stiffly, her clipboard resting untouched on the table. For the first time in years, she looked small, diminished, no longer the queen she had once styled herself to be. The meeting began with routine business, but it was clear everyone was waiting for one item: the vote. Petitions had circulated, signatures gathered, and now the community was ready to decide Karen's fate. The motion was simple: remove her as HOA president and elect a replacement. When the time came, the vote was swift and decisive. One by one, neighbors raised their hands. Some did so hesitantly, others with enthusiasm, but nearly every hand in the room went up. The final tally wasn't close. Karen was out. The silence that followed was heavy. But it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of finality. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to hold onto the power, slipping from her grasp. But there was no saving it. The authority she had wielded for years had been stripped away, not by one rebellious homeowner, but by the very community she had claimed to protect. Neighbors turned to one another, exchanging smiles, nods, even quiet laughter. Relief spread through the room like a wave. For the first time, the HOA belonged to the residents, not to the iron fist of one woman. Karen stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Without a word, she grabbed her clipboard and stormed out of the clubhouse. The door slammed shut behind her, echoing like the final note of a long, bitter song. That was the last time most people ever saw her in any official capacity. Within months, her house was listed for sale, and soon after, she was gone. In her absence, Brookside Meadows began to heal. New leadership took over the HOA, focusing on collaboration rather than punishment. Fines dropped, rules relaxed, and for the first time in years, residents felt like they had a voice. The neighborhood transformed from a place of fear into a true community, and in one backyard, the pool sparkled brighter than ever. It became more than a luxury, it became a gathering place. Families swam on hot summer days, neighbors shared barbecues by the water, and children laughed as they splashed in the deep end. The pool had started as a dream, then turned into a symbol of defiance, and finally stood as a monument to freedom for the homeowner. The victory was never just about beating Karen. It was about proving that no amount of intimidation could crush determination. It was about showing a community that they didn't have to live under fear, that even the loudest, most controlling voice could be silenced when people stood their ground. As the seasons passed, Karen's name became nothing more than a story, told in hushed tones to newcomers. They would hear about the woman who once ruled the neighborhood with fines and threats, the president who thought she owned every yard, every garden, every inch of Brookside Meadows. And they would hear how it all ended, not with another of her letters, but with a pool, the pool that she tried to destroy, the pool she once demanded to claim, the pool that brought down her rain dot. And so, under the golden glow of summer evenings, with water shimmering and laughter echoing across the fences, Brookside Meadows found peace, not the forced, suffocating peace of Karen's rule, but the true peace that comes when freedom replaces fear. The queen of fines and clipboards had fallen, the neighborhood had won, and the pool, the simple backyard dream that had started it all, remained, a permanent reminder that even in the most controlled of places, defiance could bring change.